Empaths are deeply attuned to the emotional currents around them. They feel intensely, they absorb, and they often carry the weight of others' pain, as if it were their own. But when an empath suddenly goes quiet, it's not just a moment of silence, it's a signal. It's their mind, body, and spirit telling the world that something has shifted inside. In a culture that prizes constant connection and social affirmation, the retreat of an empath is profound. It is often a protective act, a subconscious boundary setting, or a necessary pause to heal from accumulated emotional exhaustion. Their quiet is a symptom of deep self-preservation, and it demands attention, compassion, and understanding. To witness it without judgment, to notice without interference, is to honor the delicate equilibrium they maintain between empathy and personal integrity. When an empath becomes quiet, it is rarely a superficial or casual response. It is a deeply rooted signal arising from the intersection of biology, psychology, and emotional experience. Empaths process the world in a uniquely intense way. They perceive not only the surface emotions of those around them, but also the subtle undercurrents that exist beneath social facades. This heightened sensitivity can make everyday interactions overwhelming, because what others may shrug off or barely notice, an empath feels profoundly. The silence that follows sudden withdrawal is, in essence, a defense mechanism. It is the empath's mind and body asserting a necessary boundary in a world that often demands emotional availability without consideration for personal limits. Emotional overwhelm is not just mental fatigue for an empath, it manifests physically, psychologically, and spiritually. The heart rate may accelerate, muscles tense. Sleep may become disrupted, and a sense of internal chaos can they attempt to process the myriad energies they have absorbed. The quiet is a form of self-preservation, a pause that is essential for survival in an environment where their sensitivity can easily become a burden. This withdrawal is also an unconscious communication. The empath is signaling, without words, that the current circumstances are unsustainable. It is a message to themselves and to those around them that they need space, that they need to recalibrate their inner equilibrium before continuing to engage with the emotional landscape outside of them. Often, this silence comes after repeated exposure to toxic dynamics, such as manipulative behavior, emotional exploitation, or unreciprocated vulnerability. Each interaction adds a layer of stress, and empaths have a limited bandwidth for processing emotional input. When the threshold is crossed, the only recourse left is quietude. A retreat from the noise, the demands, and the emotional invasions. The empath's silence is frequently misinterpreted by others as disinterest, aloofness, or even rejection. But in reality, it is the opposite. It is a profound, protective act rooted in self-respect and the need for inner restoration. In this quiet, empaths may engage in deep reflection, evaluating the relationships and environments that have contributed to their overwhelm. They are assessing which connections are safe, nourishing and reciprocal, and which are draining or harmful. This process is not merely cognitive but somatic. Empaths feel the impact of each encounter in their bodies and nervous systems. Their nervous systems often carry the imprint of every interaction, and silence is a way to reset, to regulate and to recover. There is also a spiritual dimension to their quietness. Empaths are often attuned to the energetic quality of the spaces they inhabit. When they sense discord, judgment, or emotional toxicity, retreating into silence allows them to avoid further contamination of their own emotional and spiritual well-being. It is in this space that they can reconnect with themselves, with their intrinsic values, and with the aspects of life that nurture their growth and resilience. Understanding this behavior requires a shift in perspective. The empath's withdrawal is not about punishment or manipulation. It is about preservation, healing, and maintaining the integrity of their emotional ecosystem. Those who care about empaths must recognize that silence is not an absence of feeling, but a concentrated, intense form of self-care. Engaging with an empath during their quiet period requires patience, empathy, and respect for their boundaries. It is a delicate balance of giving them space while remaining emotionally available in ways that do not overwhelm or intrude. Silence in this context is a teaching in itself. It calls attention to the ways in which emotional energy flows, how boundaries are maintained, and how one can cultivate environments that honor sensitivity rather than exploit it. For the empath, this retreat is rarely permanent. It is cyclical, a necessary rhythm that allows them to re-engage with the world more fully, with clarity, with groundedness, and with renewed emotional reserves. Their quiet is ultimately a protective, restorative act, and those who understand it can support empaths in profound ways, learning to respect the subtle signals that their silence conveys. and honoring the depth of their emotional experience. Quiet moments for an empath are not merely pauses, they are vital periods of reflection and emotional recalibration. Unlike those who may process experiences externally or verbally, empaths require inner silence to integrate the vast spectrum of sensations and emotions they absorb from their environment. Each encounter, whether subtle or overt, leaves an imprint on their psyche. The human brain is constantly interpreting stimuli, but for empaths, this process is amplified. They do not just experience what is happening to them, they experience what is happening to others as well. Over time, this creates an accumulation of unprocessed emotions, both their own and those of the people around them. Without intentional periods of quiet, empaths risk becoming overwhelmed, anxious, or even physically ill as their nervous system struggles to manage the relentless flow of emotional input. This need for reflection is not a luxury. It is a biological and psychological necessity. When an empath withdraws into quiet, it is a way of creating a container in which they can safely examine their own feelings apart from the external noise. In this reflective space, they can differentiate between emotions that are authentically theirs and those absorbed from others, a task that is critical for maintaining their sense of self. Emotional recalibration involves not just recognizing the source of feelings, but also understanding their significance, processing any lingering distress, and identifying ways to respond rather than react. For many empaths, this is a learned skill because society often rewards outward expression and constant engagement while dismissing the need for introspection. In their quiet moments, empaths engage in what can be described as an internal dialogue, observing patterns in their interactions, noting triggers, and assessing the dynamics that contribute to emotional stress. They are continuously seeking balance between giving and receiving, between connection and autonomy, and between empathy and self-preservation. The quiet allows them to evaluate relationships, environments, and even their own behaviors, ensuring that they maintain alignment with their values and emotional health. This process is deeply restorative because it reduces internal dissonance, allowing the empath to process feelings without distraction or external pressure. It is also a preventative measure. Without this periodic recalibration, empaths risk burnout, emotional collapse, or withdrawal that is reactive rather than intentional. Reflection in silence is thus a form of self-care and self-regulation that ensures long-term resilience. It is in these quiet moments that empaths can reconnect with their own needs, desires, and boundaries. They can identify what energizes them versus what depletes them, allowing them to make conscious choices about how they engage with the world. This recalibration is not simply about rest. It is about understanding the internal landscape and creating strategies for navigating a world that often misunderstands or undervalues sensitivity. The process can also involve integrating insights, practicing mindfulness, or engaging in creative expression, all of which allow for the safe processing of accumulated emotional energy. The empath's quiet moments are, in essence, sacred spaces for emotional hygiene, places where they can detoxify from the influence of others, unresolved emotions, and restore equilibrium. For those who interact with empaths, recognizing and respecting these periods of silence is crucial. Pressuring an empath to explain themselves prematurely or to re-engage before they are ready can exacerbate emotional strain, whereas allowing them the space to reflect supports their capacity to connect authentically in the future. In these quiet periods, empaths may also reevaluate their social and relational environments, discerning which connections are reciprocal and nurturing versus those that are draining or harmful. Reflection and recalibration are therefore both restorative and evaluative processes, helping empaths maintain their emotional integrity and navigate life with clarity and resilience. The quiet is not emptiness, it is full of internal work, of untangling emotional knots, and of creating space for intentional living. When an empath emerges from silence, they are not merely returning to social engagement. They are returning with greater awareness, groundedness, and capacity to give without losing themselves in the process. Understanding this dimension of empathic experience requires a shift in perspective. Silence is not withdrawal, avoidance, or rejection. It is an essential act of inner care and conscious self-management. Respecting it, therefore, is both an acknowledgement of their depth and an invitation for a healthier, more authentic connection that honors the rhythms of sensitivity. Sudden withdrawal by an empath often signals accumulated trauma or unresolved relational pain, even if it appears abrupt or disproportionate to outsiders. Empaths are wired to feel deeply, and their nervous systems do not distinguish easily between present emotional stimuli and past unresolved experiences. This means that each interaction has the potential to awaken old wounds, whether from childhood, previous relationships, or long-standing patterns of neglect and betrayal. When an empath suddenly goes quiet, it is rarely a superficial choice. It is a protective response to the cumulative effect of relational stress. Trauma, whether overt or subtle, leaves an imprint on the body and mind. Empaths, because of their heightened sensitivity, often carry this imprint not only internally, but also externally, resonating with the emotional energy of those around them. This creates a layered burden that requires careful processing. In many cases, withdrawal is the only way to prevent further exacerbation of emotional distress. The silence becomes a shield, a buffer against further relational strain, and a necessary pause to integrate and process unresolved pain. The empath may be responding to a perceived threat, not necessarily an immediate one, but one that echoes past relational injuries. Their nervous system interprets patterns of behavior, tone, or energy in a highly sensitive way, sometimes recognizing dangers that are invisible to others. This perceptual intensity is both a gift and a vulnerability. When unprocessed trauma accumulates, it can manifest in the empath as anxiety, irritability, depression, or physical symptoms, making it imperative for them to retreat into quiet. Silence allows them to assess their environment and relationships without the distortion of immediate emotional reactivity. It is during these periods of withdrawal that an empath may examine relational dynamics, recalling past events, and recognizing patterns that have contributed to their discomfort or pain. This reflective process is crucial for breaking cycles of traumatization, helping the empath discern which relationships are supportive and which are harmful. The empath's quiet is a protective strategy to avoid exacerbating emotional wounds while they regain internal equilibrium. Furthermore, unresolved relational pain can interact with current experiences in subtle ways, amplifying sensitivity and triggering strong emotional responses to situations that may seem minor to others. The empath's withdrawal is often an attempt to regain control over this interplay of past and present, to stabilize themselves before re-engaging. Silence allows for self-regulation, giving the empath space to acknowledge and honor their own feelings, rather than suppress them to meet external expectations. Many empaths struggle with the societal pressure to maintain constant openness and availability, which conflicts with their need for self-preservation. The abruptness of their quiet can therefore feel jarring to others, but it is often the only viable response to emotional overload. Understanding this behavior requires seeing the empath as both deeply vulnerable and highly intelligent in emotional navigation. Their silence is a form of internal triage, a necessary pause to prevent emotional collapse and to process unresolved trauma in a contained, safe manner. During these periods, empaths may engage in various forms of self-care, whether conscious or unconscious, that help them process pain and restore emotional balance. They may journal, meditate, reflect, or simply observe their own emotions without external interference. These activities are not passive. They are active mechanisms for emotional healing and resilience building. Recognizing and respecting an empath's withdrawal is therefore critical for those who care about them. Attempts to force communication or resolve perceived conflicts prematurely can exacerbate relational pain and reinforce patterns of mistrust or fear. Instead, providing compassionate space and patience allows the empath to return when they are ready, fully present, and emotionally regulated. Their silence is ultimately a profound statement about the need to honor internal boundaries and the consequences of ignoring accumulated emotional pain. When an empath emerges from quiet, they are not merely resuming social engagement, they are integrating past experiences, regulating emotional energy, and ensuring that future interactions are healthier, more conscious, and aligned with their well-being. To witness an empath's withdrawal without judgment is to acknowledge the depth of their sensitivity, the weight of their past relational experiences, and the courage it takes to protect themselves while remaining open to meaningful connection. Understanding this pattern transforms perception. The quiet is not a withdrawal from love or trust, but an essential process of healing, reflection, and emotional preservation, laying the groundwork for authentic and sustainable relationships. Empaths often protect themselves by disengaging before expressing anger, hurt, or frustration, and this protective withdrawal is a sophisticated, subconscious mechanism. Unlike many individuals who externalize emotion immediately, empaths process their experiences deeply, internally weighing the impact of every interaction. Their heightened sensitivity allows them to detect subtle shifts in tone, body language, or energy that might signal conflict, judgment, or emotional imbalance. When they sense potential harm or emotional exhaustion approaching, they often retreat quietly rather than engage in confrontation. This silence is not avoidance in the conventional sense. It is a strategic act of self-preservation that reflects an acute awareness of their own emotional limits. Anger or hurt, when expressed impulsively, can escalate relational tension or create outcomes that feel unsafe for empaths. By choosing to disengage, they prevent emotional flooding, protecting themselves from reactive behaviors that might compromise their integrity or well-being. The empath's nervous system is constantly monitoring for patterns that indicate potential emotional harm. Over time, repeated exposure to criticism, insensitivity, or exploitative behavior can erode their resilience. When their threshold is reached, the empath's preemptive quiet serves as a boundary, signaling the need to step back and recover. This disengagement is often subtle, and outsiders may misinterpret it as aloofness or indifference. Yet for the empath, it is a conscious and necessary act, an internal regulation to prevent further depletion. Silence, in this context, functions as a buffer zone, a space where they can process complex emotional data without adding the risk of reactive confrontation. It is within this space that the empath can examine their feelings, differentiate between their own emotional reactions and those absorbed from others, and determine how best to respond moving forward. Disengagement before expression of anger also reflects the empath's desire for healthy communication. They are deeply aware of the consequences of words spoken in emotional overwhelm and often choose to wait until clarity is restored. This self-regulation prevents unnecessary harm to themselves and to others and preserves relationships that might otherwise suffer from unprocessed emotional reactions. In many cases, this protective silence is a learned pattern. From early life experiences, empaths often recognize that direct expression of strong emotions is met with rejection, misunderstanding, or punishment. Retreating into quiet becomes a survival strategy, one that maintains personal safety while also respecting the emotional environment. This does not mean the empath suppresses their feelings indefinitely. Rather, they store and process them internally, emerging when they feel secure, grounded, and ready for constructive engagement. Their quiet is an invitation for reflection, for themselves and for those around them. By disengaging, empaths create a space where they can evaluate relational dynamics, discern patterns of energy exchange, and determine which connections are reciprocal and nurturing versus draining or harmful. They are, in essence, practicing emotional triage, choosing when and where to expend energy, when to assert themselves, and when to conserve strength. This pattern is particularly important in a world that often undervalues sensitivity. Empaths frequently face social environments that reward assertiveness, extroversion, and immediate reaction, which can conflict with their natural inclination toward reflection and deep processing. Their disengagement is a corrective measure, a way to honor their emotional needs while navigating an often overwhelming social landscape. Understanding this behavior requires a shift in perspective. The empath's silence is not passive or weak, it is an act of courage and wisdom. It signals a commitment to self-preservation, emotional clarity, and relational integrity. Those who interact with empaths must recognize that this preemptive quiet is a form of communication in itself, a signal that they need space, understanding, and respect. When handled with care, the empath's temporary withdrawal can strengthen relationships, allowing interactions to resume on a healthier, more conscious level. The silent pause gives the empath time to return with emotional clarity, groundedness, and the ability to engage authentically. In this way, their protective disengagement is not only a survival strategy, but a method for maintaining relational health and personal integrity, ensuring that their sensitivity remains a source of strength rather than vulnerability. Silence can be an empath's subtle but profound way of communicating a message to those around them. It is a call for others to examine their energy, behaviors, and the dynamics they bring into relationships. Empaths are uniquely attuned to emotional atmospheres. They sense not only what is said, but what is unspoken, the underlying tension, the hidden motivations, and the unsurfaced feelings in every interaction. When an empath retreats into quiet, it is often less about themselves and more about the relational environment they inhabit. Their withdrawal is a mirror reflecting the emotional energy of others, a silent yet powerful invitation to consider the impact of one's actions on those around them. In many situations, the empath's silence functions as a diagnostic tool. By stepping back, they create space to observe interactions more clearly, to discern patterns that may otherwise go unnoticed in the immediacy of conversation. This observation allows the empath to evaluate whether the environment is emotionally nourishing or toxic, whether the energy circulating is reciprocal or draining. Their quiet is therefore a form of emotional feedback, an implicit signal that something in the relational dynamic requires attention, adjustment, or repair. For those attuned to subtle cues, an empath's silence can highlight imbalance, miscommunication, or emotional misalignment in a relationship. However, this signal is rarely recognized for what it is. Many interpret the quiet as disinterest, detachment, or even rejection. Yet for the empath, it is a conscious act of self-protection and relational awareness. They are not disengaging arbitrarily. They are creating the conditions necessary to understand, evaluate, and respond in a way that preserves their well-being while maintaining the integrity of the relationship. This process requires immense patience and self-regulation. Empaths often absorb so much emotional input that immediate reaction can be overwhelming or counterproductive. Their silence ensures that they are not reacting impulsively, but are instead engaging in careful reflection to understand the full scope of the situation. This pause also allows them to determine which aspects of the environment are healthy and which are harmful. By withdrawing, empaths provide themselves with the space to recalibrate, process, and realign with their own values and boundaries. It is through this quiet reflection that they can make informed decisions about how to proceed in relationships, work environments, or social situations. Moreover, the empath's silence serves as a subtle teaching. It encourages others to become more conscious of their own energy and actions. In a world often driven by superficial interaction and reactive communication, the empath's quiet highlights the necessity of mindfulness and self-awareness. It draws attention to the emotional consequences of behavior, both intended and unintended, and challenges others to consider the impact of their words, actions, and energy on sensitive individuals. Their withdrawal is thus a form of relational wisdom, a way to influence the dynamic without confrontation or verbal conflict. It communicates that emotional balance, respect, and reciprocity are essential components of meaningful connection. Understanding the empath's silence in this way requires empathy and attentiveness, recognizing that this withdrawal is not about punishment, disdain, or avoidance, but about maintaining relational integrity and personal well-being. By paying attention to the quiet, others can gain insight into their own behaviors, patterns, and impact. They are given an opportunity to adjust, to approach relationships with greater awareness, and to cultivate environments that honor sensitivity rather than exploit it. The silence is an invitation to reflection, a mirror held up to interpersonal dynamics, and a call to action for conscious, compassionate engagement. For the empath, this period of quiet is as much about teaching and holding space as it is about self-protection. It allows them to remain emotionally available in a sustainable way, ensuring that their sensitivity does not become a liability but a strength. In this sense, the empath's silence is both protective and instructive. It preserves their emotional health while subtly guiding others to examine their own energy, motives, and behaviors. Recognizing and respecting this form of communication fosters deeper connection, mutual understanding, and relational maturity. It underscores the idea that silence is not emptiness, it is meaning, it is signal, and it is a powerful tool for preserving emotional integrity while encouraging conscious interaction. Going quiet is often a subconscious form of self-healing and emotional detox for empaths, an instinctive strategy to restore balance after prolonged exposure to intense emotional stimuli. Empaths absorb emotions from the world around them, sometimes subtly, sometimes in overwhelming waves, and these emotions do not always belong to them. Over time, this constant absorption can accumulate like sediment, creating internal tension, fatigue, and even physical manifestations of stress. Silence, then, is a vital mechanism through which they process, release, and integrate these absorbed energies. It is an act of self-preservation and restoration, a pause that allows the nervous system to recover and the mind to regain clarity. In a society that rarely values introspection over constant output, this self-imposed quiet is not laziness or avoidance. It is an essential response to the overstimulation inherent in empathic living. During these periods of silence, empaths engage in a process that is both conscious and unconscious. They may reflect internally on their emotional landscape, identifying which feelings are truly theirs and which are absorbed from external sources. They may meditate, journal, or immerse themselves in nature, creating a safe container in which the emotional debris collected from others can be gently released. This detoxification is not only psychological but physiological. The body of an empath literally processes emotional stress, often affecting sleep, digestion, heart rate, and energy levels. The quiet provides an opportunity for the body to reset and recalibrate in tandem with the mind. Emotional detox is also a matter of neural regulation. Empaths' brains are highly sensitive to social cues and emotional subtleties. They often experience hypervigilance in response to emotional signals from others, which can lead to cognitive overload. Silence allows the nervous system to downshift from a state of constant alertness to one of reflection and calm. In this way, going quiet functions as an emotional reset button, helping the empath regain equilibrium before engaging with the social world. The process is inherently restorative but also protective. By withdrawing, empaths prevent themselves from reacting impulsively to external stressors, which could lead to conflict, relational strain, or further emotional depletion. They create the conditions necessary to process their experiences thoughtfully, maintaining emotional integrity and reducing the risk of burnout. The detoxification that occurs in silence also serves a deeper, spiritual function. Empaths are often attuned to energy not only at the human level, but within their broader environment. Emotional contamination, unresolved tension, and negative energy can accumulate in subtle ways, affecting their sense of vitality and well-being. Quiet moments provide the empath with the opportunity to cleanse these energies, restore a sense of inner harmony, and reconnect with sources of grounding and nourishment. The subconscious aspect of this healing cannot be overstated. Often, empaths are not fully aware of the extent of the emotional detox taking place during their quiet periods. Their mind, body, and spirit are working in concert, sorting through experiences, regulating emotional responses, and integrating insights in ways that will manifest later in behavior, clarity, and relational choices. Respecting this process requires an understanding that silence is not absence, it is active engagement with one's inner life. For those around empaths, it is critical to recognize that their quiet is not withdrawal from love, attention, or connection, but a necessary step in maintaining their capacity for authentic engagement. Attempting to force an empath back into interaction during these periods can disrupt the detox process, potentially leading to exhaustion or emotional shutdown. By allowing space, observers honor the empath's process and support their restoration, ensuring that they can return with emotional balance, resilience, and clarity. The quiet is both an act of healing and a lesson in boundary. Setting it signals the empaths need to protect their inner resources, to acknowledge and release what does not belong to them, and to cultivate environments that sustain rather than drain. Ultimately, the empath's silence is a sophisticated, deeply embodied response to emotional overload, a detox that restores equilibrium, strengthens resilience, and preserves the integrity of their sensitivity. In this state, the empath emerges not only rejuvenated, but also more capable of discerning the subtle energies in their world, engaging with authenticity, and maintaining relational harmony without sacrificing their own well-being. The environment's emotional toxicity often drives empathic retreat, compelling sensitive individuals to withdraw into silence as a protective response. Empaths do not exist in isolation. They are constantly interacting with the energy, moods, and unresolved emotions of those around them. In healthy environments, this sensitivity allows for deep connection, compassion, and intuition. In toxic environments, however, it becomes a burden as empaths absorb negativity, conflict, manipulation, and stress that can overwhelm their nervous system. Emotional toxicity comes in many forms: chronic criticism, passive-aggressive behavior, manipulation, dishonesty, or the simple but pervasive presence of unresolved anger or resentment. Empaths, due to their heightened attunement, perceive these energies intensely and often before they are consciously articulated. Their nervous systems interpret subtle cues as signals of danger or imbalance, triggering a cascade of stress responses: elevated heart rate, muscle tension, hypervigilance, and mental preoccupation with relational dynamics. When these toxic patterns persist, the empath's only recourse is often withdrawal. Silence is not merely an absence of communication, it is a survival strategy, a boundary, and a method of preserving emotional integrity. The empath instinctively knows that continued engagement in such environments will exacerbate emotional depletion, compromise their sense of self, and potentially lead to burnout. Retreating into quiet allows them to regain control, process the emotional input they have absorbed, and protect themselves from further harm. This withdrawal can be subtle or dramatic, but in all cases, it signals a deep need for safety and containment. Empaths are not motivated by avoidance in the sense of fear or weakness. They are motivated by self-preservation and the maintenance of relational and emotional equilibrium. Silence provides a space to evaluate the toxicity they have absorbed, identifying sources, assessing impact, and determining how to interact with or distance themselves from those who drain their energy. The process often involves reflection, meditation, journaling, or other grounding practices that allow the empath to release absorbed stress and recalibrate. Toxicity in the environment is often systemic, meaning that it can involve patterns of behavior rather than isolated incidents. Empaths sense these patterns acutely, perceiving the rhythm of emotional energy in groups, families, workplaces, or social circles. Withdrawal, therefore, becomes a method of detaching from persistent negative cycles and reclaiming the empath's internal equilibrium. In essence, silence is a form of emotional treadge. The empath prioritizes their own well-being, regulating what they absorb and what they release. The retreat also serves as an indirect form of communication. By going quiet, empaths signal to others that the relational or environmental dynamics are unsustainable. For those attuned to subtle cues, this silence provides insight into the toxicity present, offering an opportunity for reflection, change, or rebalancing. However, silence is rarely understood by those who are emotionally insensitive or unaware, and it is often misinterpreted as disinterest, withdrawal, or judgment. Recognizing the empath's quiet as a protective response rather than a personal affront is essential for maintaining healthy relationships and fostering understanding. Environmental toxicity affects empaths at multiple levels: psychologically, physiologically, and spiritually. Chronic exposure without reprieve can lead to anxiety, depression, irritability, and a sense of disconnection from oneself. Silence allows for reintegration, emotional detoxification, and the restoration of spiritual and energetic balance. It is an act of resilience, demonstrating the empath's ability to navigate challenging spaces without sacrificing their inner equilibrium. For those interacting with empaths, the lesson is clear: the environment matters profoundly. Supportive, respectful, and emotionally conscious spaces allow empaths to thrive. Toxic, draining spaces necessitate withdrawal. Silence, in this context, is not only an act of self-protection, but also a call for mindfulness in social and relational interactions. It highlights the importance of cultivating relationships and environments that honor sensitivity rather than exploit it. The empath's retreat is thus a deeply intelligent and adaptive response. It safeguards their emotional integrity while simultaneously providing insight into the relational or environmental health around them. By paying attention to these periods of silence, observers can gain a clearer understanding of the impact of toxicity, recognize the empath's boundaries, and cultivate spaces where connection, empathy, and emotional safety can flourish. In this way, the quiet is not merely a pause, it is an essential restorative and instructive practice that allows empaths to survive, heal, and continue engaging with the world from a place of grounded awareness, balance, and strength. Recognizing and respecting an empath's silence is the culmination of understanding their emotional and energetic world, and it is essential for fostering trust, connection, and authentic engagement. Empaths retreat into quiet not out of disinterest or disconnection, but as a deliberate and often subconscious act to maintain their inner equilibrium. This silence is an invitation for those around them to exercise awareness, compassion, and patience, acknowledging the depth of the empath's experience without demanding immediate explanation or engagement. For many empaths, social and relational interactions carry a profound cost. They absorb not only the overt emotions of others, but also the subtle, unspoken energies that pervade their environments. Over time, this cumulative load can become overwhelming, making periods of withdrawal necessary for emotional regulation and self-preservation. By honoring their silence, we create a space where the empath can process these inputs safely, free from additional external pressure. Respecting this silence is, in essence, an acknowledgement of the empath's boundaries. Empaths are acutely aware of the reciprocity and integrity within relationships, and their quiet often signals that their emotional needs are not being fully honored. Forcing engagement, questioning the withdrawal, or attempting to extract explanations prematurely can compromise trust, exacerbate emotional exhaustion, and reinforce patterns of misunderstanding or boundary violations. By contrast, patience and respectful presence allow empaths to navigate their internal landscape on their own terms, returning to interaction when they feel emotionally replenished, grounded, and ready for authentic engagement. Silence is also a form of communication in itself. Even without words, the empath is sending a clear message: they require space, introspection, and safety. Recognizing this signal shifts the perspective from judgment to understanding, encouraging observers to reflect on their own energy, behaviors, and contributions to the relational dynamic. The empath's quiet becomes an opportunity for relational mindfulness, a chance to examine not only the needs of the sensitive individual, but also the quality and tone of the emotional environment. For those who truly wish to maintain connection with an empath, the approach is not to fill the silence with pressure or expectation, but to provide a supportive, stable presence. This can be as simple as respecting boundaries, offering patience, or creating an emotionally safe space where the empath feels acknowledged without being burdened. In doing so, trust is strengthened, intimacy deepened, and the empath's natural sensitivity can flourish rather than become a source of vulnerability. Furthermore, respecting silence encourages a broader cultural and interpersonal awareness. It highlights the need to value introspection, honor sensitivity, and cultivate environments that allow for reflection, emotional processing, and self-care. Empaths teach, often implicitly, that connection is not about constant interaction or performance, but about the quality, reciprocity, and intentionality of engagement. Their quiet is a lesson in emotional literacy. It communicates the consequences of ignoring boundaries, overextending empathy, or failing to recognize the subtle energy dynamics in relationships. By listening to the silence rather than attempting to fill it, we honor the empath's internal process and allow space for healing, recalibration, and eventual re-engagement. This is crucial because empaths who are consistently disregarded or pressured during periods of withdrawal may retreat further, develop distrust, or disengage entirely, not out of malice but as a necessary protective measure. Recognizing and respecting their silence thus becomes an essential skill for maintaining connection, fostering mutual understanding, and supporting emotional health. In practice, this means observing without interference, offering support without intrusion, and valuing their presence even when it is quiet. It requires cultivating patience, empathy, and awareness of one's own emotional contributions to the relational environment. Ultimately, the empath's silence is a profound reminder that emotional well-being and self-care are not optional, they are vital. By honoring their quiet, we affirm their boundaries, respect their inner world, and participate in a relational dynamic that is conscious, compassionate, and sustainable. Silence, in this sense, is both protective and instructive. It safeguards the empath's energy while offering insight into the nature of healthy connection, mutual respect, and the transformative potential of attending to the subtle, often unspoken, emotional currents that shape human relationships. By paying attention, by waiting patiently, and by respecting the silence, we not only support the empath but also enrich our own capacity for presence, awareness, and authentic relational engagement.